Welcome everyone. I'm Eileen Schell. I'm professor of writing and coordinator of the Moral Injury Project and Veterans Writing Group here at Syracuse University. Welcome to the first webinar in our series, Finding True North in the Midst of Change, a set of panel conversations about veterans, student veterans, and military personnel finding true north in the midst of transitional times. Our first of 3 webinars this fall will focus on veteran transition from military to college and college to work. Before I introduce our panelists today, I'll say a few words about the Moral Injury Project. The Moral Injury Project of Hendricks Chapel at Syracuse started in 2015 under the direction of Hendricks Chapel Dean Tiffany Steinwert as a way of addressing the question of moral injury among U.S. service members and veterans. The project continues under the supervision of Dean Brian Conkle of Hendricks Chapel. And the project is coordinated by myself and a group of other faculty, staff, and veterans across Syracuse University and Lemoyne College. I'd like to thank our funders who generously provided funding for this event, and also the staff of Hendricks Chapel for making this event possible. I'd like to thank Peg Northrup, Brian Conkle, Delaney Vanway, Alex Snow, and 2 wonderful SU interns, Whitney Wellbaum and Christina Cole. I'd also like to thank CART Services for making this an accessible event. So what is the Moral Injury Project? We've sponsored panels, conferences, film screenings, and retreats for veterans, their families, active duty service members, chaplains, military officers, therapists, social workers, and others in the community seeking to understand the impact of moral injury on U.S. service members, veterans, and their families. Moral injury refers to the damage done to one's conscience or moral compass when that person perpetrates, witnesses, or fails to prevent acts that transgress one's own moral beliefs, values, or ethical codes of conduct. This year, instead of doing the normal events that we tend to do, we decided to shift gears a little bit to focus on the question of transition, a topic that has occupied the minds of many of us in our daily lives as we deal with a rapidly changing world affected by a global pandemic, among other factors. Of course, transition is something that veterans and military personnel and those who work on supporting them know all about. It's a daily occurrence. One of the key populations on the campuses of U.S. colleges and universities dealing with the question of transition are student veterans and also veterans entering the workplace. Today's panel is an opportunity to discuss the challenge of transitioning from military service to higher education and the workplace. And it might be a different direction, workplace, then higher education. Our panelists will share advice, strategies, and stories that will be helpful to veterans and all who are supporting them in higher education and the workplace. Today's program will feature Jennifer Jeffrey, an academic librarian at SUNY Potsdam and veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard, in which she served for 7 years, and also Jen Reddy, Associate Director of Continuing Education at Lemoyne College. Both have experience working in academic and career services for veterans to help reintegrate them into their communities and into higher education and discover a sense of belonging outside of military culture. We also have Michael Vendeet, an Army veteran and Lemoyne College graduate, who will serve on the panel. He served as president of the Lemoyne College Student Veterans Association until his graduation, and he's employed as an accountant, and he's here to share his story and his experiences with us. I want to say that even though it's in a webinar format, there will be opportunities to ask questions through the chat feature. It will be monitored by me and also my colleague, Susan French. We're happy to bring your questions, your comments, and your resources forward. If you have resources on veteran transition that you want to share, you can put in a link. We'll also save the chat and harvest that information and share it more widely with people that are interested. So we hope to foster conversation that will go beyond this webinar into other events. So without further ado, I'd like to have our first panelist, Jen Jeffrey, speak. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Eileen, and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for being here. And I want to talk about transition as something that's integral to our lives and something that if we pay attention to it and make some decisions, conscious decisions about how we want to go through the changes in our lives, then we can learn to look forward to them and be more comfortable with not knowing exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to talk about my background and continuing journey after leaving the military and share some things that helped me to weather the many transitions that have occurred since that bright June morning that I walked out of Station San Key, Florida, and abruptly didn't belong anywhere. And also what has gotten me through the last 3 years when I decided at 47 years old to go to graduate school. And then in the year and a half that I looked for this permanent job that I have at as an academic librarian, which is what I wanted to be. I worked at a literacy center, cashier at a liquor store, executive secretary to a president of a college, an office manager for a tech startup, and a tech writer at a factory. And this is all within the space of a year and a half. So talk about transition and adjustment to different spaces and cultures. I have a little bit of experience with that. And I want to also talk to you about some ideas that might be helpful for your own transitions and to pose some questions to you and others to think about going forward as we encounter people going through transition that might need our advocacy or someone to really listen to them and, you know, help them figure out what they need to do for themselves. And we already possess, as veterans, tools that we can use to get through transitions because we're used to doing that when we go from one mission to another. We've been trained to be problem solvers. We have situational awareness and persistence in the face of hardship. We also work within a framework of rules and regulations for getting things done. So we're more easily, I think, able to create our own frameworks for the next thing that we have to do and our own way to get the things done that we need to do. And we can accomplish a lot when we put our minds to it. But when you leave the military, you create those frameworks. But what we haven't really been taught to is listen to ourselves and pay attention to the story of what's happening in our lives. Because in the military, it's always go, 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 and sometimes just sit around and do nothing and wait for the next thing. But it's not our story. It's whatever mission we're on or whatever project we're doing, it's the story of that and you know how our families are working with that. But we're never really looking at maybe what we want to do, what we want our purpose to be, and understanding how our story works into the next steps. And so one of the things I do is try to figure out ways to slow myself down and doesn't always work, but sometimes that's if you want to have writing or art or a way to express, you know, some of that subconscious things that's inside you. The tool that I use for that is a practice, like a writing practice. You get up and you write every morning or whatever it is that you want to do. I particularly like writing because I'm a writer, but other people might do a run in the morning, and it just gives them that space to think about, you know, what their day is going to be like, what the intention of the day is, but also to think about the future. And when we think about identity, we want to integrate our military identity into whatever we're doing next. And I think a lot of people, I know when I got out of the Coast Guard, I tried to separate my military self because people weren't really paying attention to veterans in 1998 when I separated from the service. And also they didn't value that when I went into the workplace. So I thought, well, I better like put this aside in a box, which, you know, looking back and with perspective wasn't the correct thing to do, but I didn't know that at the time. So I would encourage you to think about how to integrate that into what you're doing. And the other thing with identity is like when you're in school and you're maybe in your first job out of school, you're still trying to figure out how you want to go forward with your career or with what you're learning. And the good thing about school is that you can practice and you can fail, and it's okay, because it doesn't, you're not putting food on the table and things like that. So I encourage people to try things when they're in school, and try things that you may not think you like, because it'll inform you of what the other things you want to do. And you don't have as much to lose that way. Like, nobody's going to die if you don't like geography club. You just don't go anymore. It's okay. And there's no contract to sign when you go to the geography club meeting. They're okay with you going or not going. They're used to people coming in and out because it's an academic setting and not a military setting. And I think that's one of the hardest things to know, and to know when maybe you've overwhelmed yourself with things, as well. And then identity is connected to action. And I think always, if I want to be a writer, I have to write. And if I think about, when I talk to students, talk to them about, what kind of student do you want to be? Do you want to be a student that watches 6 hours of TV a night and doesn't pay attention to what they're doing? Then you're not going to get the outcomes that you want. So think about what you want to have for your life, and you're creating this. The military's not creating it anymore. So you think about what you want to have and you do those actions. And when I was going to school, I finished my bachelor's degree over 9 years, working full time, and I was a single mom. So I had to have a little bit different expectations than somebody who is going to school full time and maybe doesn't have a family to take care of. And I decided how I wanted to do that. And I constantly had to recalibrate what I thought of myself as a student. But I got a lot out of it. And I mean, even at the end, when I was my last 2 semesters, I was starting to take on, in addition to my full-time job, the program manager for the Warrior Scholar Project on campus and bringing it to campus. I felt that it was so important. So I had to go and talk to my professor of a class I really liked, that I ended up getting like a B- in, because I told him I valued the class and the people I was with so much, and that I would never forget. This class is one of my favorite classes that I took, and he's my favorite professor. But I told him, there is no way that I am going to meet those expectations that you need to meet, but I'm meeting my own expectations, but I wanted to tell you that. So I think those kind of conversations that you have with people are really important. And also with yourself, is like, don't be hard on yourself. Like I am hard on myself, but like that was a lot. And I was traveling for work at the time as well. So it was, I don't even know how I'm still here. And then always look at things. I look at the things that I like Jungian philosophy, and I like entrepreneurship. So those are the places where I look for inspiration and ways to find tools and ideas to create my life. And then I use the practices and the rituals from those places to be able to go through and get things done, and also just understand myself better. And what works for me is not going to work for you. And I think that's the most important thing that we have to learn as people who work with veterans, that not all veterans are the same, and not everybody has the same experience. Even different services have different experiences and different jobs, and each service has different experiences. So we have to ask our own selves those questions. Where in the military, one size fits all. They didn't have like life vests for women in the Coast Guard, because why would you do that? There's not that many women. So there's things like that where you're used to just making do. And what I'm trying to say is, you don't have to make do. You are in this driver's seat for your education and your career, even though there may be obstacles and things you can't control. And being intentional about your transitions and how you go through life, ask good questions, have patience and kindness for yourself and others. And even when you have to pivot and change directions, It's okay. You can ask questions and gather information, but remember, just as much questioning that you do of others and gathering information, question yourself and listen to yourself. And so the questions that I had to pose to the participants here is like, how do we tell our stories so people will understand that veterans have many different experiences? And how do we get people to listen to that life experience and see the value in them? And I would say particularly recruiters for employers, like how do we get people to really understand that veterans are non-traditional, but they have equal value to somebody who follows a traditional path? And that goes for any non-traditional people. There's lots of people that had to transition their work in the middle of something because their field is rapidly changing. And what are your own tools and ideas that you use to go through transition? Thanks. And I'll pass it on to Jen Reddy now, if you want to.
Thanks, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
So a little bit about myself. Like Jennifer, I went back to school as a non-traditional student and a single parent. So that's how I came to work in continuing education, because I had firsthand experience with trying to work full-time, go to school full-time, have kids. Going to school full-time, I'd ended up going part-time after a while too, because it was just too much. So, but I understand that people have all these competing priorities, and it's really difficult when you're maybe taking care of aging parents and you're working and you're going to class maybe isn't so bad, but then you got to figure out when to do the homework afterwards. So because of my experience, that's how I ended up in continuing education. And it just so happens that 85% of the work that I do is with student veterans. And most student veterans are also non-traditional students. So I try and support them. And I will say, one of the things that I've noticed is student veterans don't like to ask for help, because they are used to being in this situation where you just get the job done, and they don't want to be perceived as weak in any way. So it's one of the things that I've learned is really letting people know, you know what, you have a whole campus here. You have access to all of this campus, just like everybody else. And there are all kinds of supports. And that can start with me, but it's all over. And it's really important to understand that these are resources that you're paying for and that you should access, be it tutoring, wellness, anything, the gym, it's all there for you. So again, many of our student veterans have kids, have full-time jobs, and like other continuing education students, and like Jennifer noted, like have all kinds of different experiences, both in the military and even before they've joined the military, and then perhaps after they've joined the military. So despite all of these, I have seen a pretty good degree of success, honestly, with student veterans, because they bring a maturity and discipline. And this is a huge advantage to some of, I think, some of the sort of non-traditional students, and helps them overcome those other barriers, the extra responsibilities, that kind of thing. And some students do indeed join the military to get the education benefits. However, there's usually more to it than that. These are often people who have an ethos of service, maybe military service has run in their family. They want to be something big, they want to be part of something that's larger than themselves. And I think it's really important that we as civilians recognize that and maybe figure out how to tap into that and bring it to campus. So one of the things I've noticed with transition is that especially folks that are getting directly out of the military and coming straight to school, you're talking about a very different culture, different sets of expectations, different norms, different schedule, everything. And it can be a real challenge. And especially when you're coming super quickly. I had a student who was deployed in Eastern Europe. 2 days later, He was on campus back in the US taking classes, hadn't been to school in ages, had to move all his stuff, had to figure out how he was going to get a car so he could get to class. I mean, it was a lot in a couple of days. So I really encourage people, if you're talking to, for those of you who work in higher education, if you're talking to prospective students, just make them aware that if they can take a little time, that might be a good thing. I do understand, though, that a lot of students, some students that go full-time because they're using GI Bill, they get that housing benefit, and they're absolutely reliant on that for the cost of living. And in that situation, I think, again, it's really important to have supports in place, because they still might have to have a job. They still might have husband or wife, kids, whatever. And I think reintegration is already difficult in some ways. Like Jennifer said, all of a sudden, you know, maybe you don't belong. I think we are doing a little bit better as a society in sort of trying to support our veterans than we used to in the 90s, and certainly in the Vietnam era than we did, but I think we've got a ways to go. So another transition issue that I've noticed, and this again speaks to different kinds of cultures, is especially in students that are really fresh out of the military, going into the liberal arts classes can be a little bit much sometimes. It's things are kind of fuzzy and like open-ended, and I don't know what the professor wants from me. And now, granted, this is a complaint that a lot of students make, and sometimes fairly enough, but it's also sometimes just, again, a matter of sort of like a different culture, different expectations, different sort of ways of thinking. So this again can be an issue for anyone, but I feel like this is a little bit more of a pronounced issue with people who are fresh out of the military. Props here. However, I think it's also important to recognize that engaging with the humanities can actually be a really wonderful thing for transitioning military veterans who are looking to find their new place in society. So props here again to Jen, who was bringing the Warrior Scholar Project to SU, and that's a really fantastic project. And also props to Dr. Deborah Cromley, who's a Lemoyne prof and may or may not be on this call, but who held a book reading and discussion series at the Syracuse Vet Center, where Homer's Odyssey served as the centerpiece for a discussion about homecoming and military veterans. So war and conflict are as old as humanity. So military members might serve at a particular time in history, and that's going to be part of their experience, both in going into the military, their experience in the military, and then when they come out and are reintegrating. But at the same time, they share with their counterparts across the ages things like enduring hardship, putting their lives on the line, occasional disagreements with those for whom they are serving. Again, that's not everybody, of course, and then the challenges of returning from war to society. So this has been going on for time immemorial. And there used to be in some societies rituals particularly for combat, for warriors coming home and reintegrating into society. And these may not, of course, erase anything, but it's a way of formally noting that this is a transition and that these people have served and that they are going from one position in life to a new position in life. And I think it's really a shame that we don't have anything like that now. Again, as was mentioned, there's more, I think there's more transition help than there used to be, but still sort of as a society, we often just kind of expect them to pick up where they left off. And that is not practical because they have had experiences that have fundamentally changed them, for better, for worse, for both. And I think that we need to make space to hear their stories, recognize and acknowledge that veterans have served on our behest, whether or not we agree with any particular conflict or nation building project or anything else, they still are there because of us. They are serving us, they are representing us. And so these experiences that they have, when it comes to higher education, again, these can be real strengths. They have generally a more sort of worldly view. They're disciplined, they're service-oriented, they're results-oriented. That can sometimes be a problem in the liberal arts classrooms occasionally, but generally that's a good thing. And that can also, that can lead to frustration, but at the same time, they also have exposure to other cultures, and they have a resilience, which I think is a real plus for the campus community. However, all those pluses aside, sometimes attending students with classes or in classes with students who are younger and sometimes a lot younger, sometimes not much younger, but have often, and not always, considerably less life experience, this can pose difficulties. Students often make assumptions about military members, what their views are, what their beliefs are, and again, veterans are like everybody else. They come from all walks of life. They have all different political views. Maybe they are even apolitical. So there's, it's painful when people assume things. And then this extends, unfortunately, not only to the student population, but also to administrators, staff, and even faculty. So, for example, I had a student who came into my office and said, my freaking teacher just asked me if I killed anyone. And I was kind of flabbergasted, especially when I found out who the faculty member was, because from what I could tell, for all intents and purposes, this faculty member wanted to be welcoming to veterans, had been involved in veteran supporting initiatives, and yet felt it was appropriate to not only ask this question, but ask this question in front of everybody. So I think one of the things we need to do on our campuses is do a better job of onboarding both faculty and staff and maybe students, and making some sort of education part of the onboarding process rather than something that's engaged in because there's already an interest. And similarly, beyond the misconceptions they encounter, again, student veterans don't necessarily want to ask for help. So I think it's really important to make sure that they know that we're there for them. So one more transitional issue that can come out in the classroom. Sometimes nobody notices that sometimes it can be an issue. And again, I think this is something that we should just educate people about in general, is hypervigilance. If you've been in a combat zone and you're now transitioning to the classroom, you don't just sort of drop that behavior when you have been trained to look for danger everywhere, to case your surroundings, and to be aware. That just doesn't go out the window. So a student veteran may want to sit in the back of the room where they can see everything. It doesn't mean that they're one of those disengaged people that's going to fall asleep in the back of the room. It may mean that they just want to be able to see everything. So again, I think just being aware of this kind of thing is something that we can do better in general in society, but also on our campuses. And I would say in a more broad sense, like the most important work that we as civilians can help with is to remember, don't pigeonhole people. See in our student veterans and in our returning service members, even if they're not on campus, like see them as people with endless possibilities like everybody else, and make space for them to make sense of their experiences, and make space for them to feel okay in talking to us, because sometimes they're reluctant to talk because they're afraid even their own families may not understand their experiences. And maybe we as civilians won't fully understand those experiences, but as part of the reintegration process, I just think it's extremely important that we very intentionally create those spaces for veterans to come home. And Michael is going to talk a lot about, he's had some of these similar experiences where people ask dumb questions, and it didn't happen just on a college campus. So Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jen and Jennifer. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Jennifer, thank you so much for your service. And Jen Reddy, thank you so much for your continued support. You know, obviously, I know people don't know too much, but Jen, I had went to Lemoyne, and, you know, one of my transitions there, you know, you were a very big key and, you know, helping me through a lot of those things. So, you know, I just want to remind, you know, student veterans that, you know, there's somebody out there that is like Jen for you. And, you know, with Jen, you know, will be a Jen to you like she was to me, and, you know, help you get, you know, things in order. And, you know, I know the transitions aren't easy, right? I certainly, you know, for myself, you know, when I left high school, it was 9/11, and, you know, I was very motivated to join the military. I didn't care too much about high school anymore. You know, I was ready to get things off the ground, and, you know, I didn't come from much, so I knew that if I wanted to go to college one day and, you know, to achieve the goals that I wanted, I would have to, you know, make something of myself. And so I seen the military as an opportunity to do that. And so, you know, something that the military is very good at is getting you transitioned in. It's very abrupt, it's very abrasive, it's very in your face. And, you know, they do a great job of really hammering in your head, you know, to be successful in the military, you be in the right place, wearing the right uniform, you know, doing the right thing, right? At the right time, right place, you know, right uniform. So, you know, you can find success being squared away on very simple tests, and your transition into the military will sort of be somewhat smooth in the sense that although it's very abrasive and physical, you know, you'll get in that mindset really quick. And so the military does a great job of getting you ready. I mean, it got me and, you know, certainly my comrades, my brothers and sisters ready for, you know, the things that we would go on to see in our transition from basic to real life active duty and then onto deployments, right? So the military does a fantastic job at that. In fact, I don't know any other country that practices chaos better than we do. You know, the most unorganized organization is really good at practicing chaos. It's what it takes to be successful in war, right? Is to constantly be thinking logically rather than emotionally. And so, you know, you really, to make that transition, you know, completely through, when you get to the end of the line and your time in service is up, you know, the military does a very terrible job at transitioning you out. And so essentially, you know, without really knowing, you know, you really have those tools inside of you, and it's a matter of discovering them, right? And so, you know, when you go on and you get out of the military, and as Jennifer said, you were a part of something so much bigger than yourself, right? And you felt that energy, that wave, you rode that wave, and that's what carried you through, right? With your comrades, your brothers. And then all of a sudden, you feel like this broken gear on this machine, and you fall off the wagon, right? And so it's like you get out and you had things covered from, you know, your time in service. You know, you didn't have to worry about certain things. You knew that on the 1st and the 15th, your check was going to be there. You knew you could go to the defect to eat. You knew you had a barracks room to go sleep in, right? And so they don't do a great job of getting you ready for life after the military or what that's going to be like. So in the beginning, you go in and you sort of have this idea that, you know, this time in service, this is going to translate to something later on. And, you know, I think initially when you get out and you sort of start to feel the effects of, well, now I'm not a part of that thing. And so what am I? What is my purpose now? And so you go through this period where, you know, you struggle, right? Because you don't necessarily know what you're going to do, right? All of a sudden it seems like you have things taken care of, right? And, you know, you go through something like that where, as Jennifer said, you walk out, you know, that last day on base, all of a sudden something changes, right? Inside of you. And it's scary out there, right? You have the tools, but you don't know that you have them, right? And so you go on and you try to transition into the civilian world. Well, a lot of the tools you have, you know, although the discipline and, you know, the attention to detail, all that stuff is great, but a lot of the tools you have about kicking in doors, or maybe your experience was different, you know, they don't really translate to, let's just say, you know, the instant workforce, right? And so, like I said, I left high school, I got a GED. I never went back and got a high school diploma. The GED, you know, carried me through to get me to the military. And then, you know, when I got home onward, I transferred to a community college before I went to Lemoyne with Jen. But in between there, you know, getting out of the military, coming back home, you know, I had a recession. So I wasn't able to find work right away. And I did eventually, but, the transition to civilian working world, some people would make comments, right? American hero, American zero, right? And so it's like, they don't really understand, right? And so some of these people, they want to be a part of it. I think they don't know how to they didn't know how to take that step for themselves and really challenge themselves to see what they were made of. And so I think that resonates deeply within them. And so, going through that transition, I thought there was something wrong with me, and really it said more about them. But, that's something that, you figure out later on in life, hindsight's 2020, but, coming home, not having work, my body went through changes, my mind went through changes. That war just changes the way that you approach things. And so that transition is tough, right? And so my parents were gracious enough to let me come, stay with them. They didn't understand the changes that were going on in my body, and I think that being young and, especially early on in the war, I was on OIF 2, this was 05 to 06, so when we got home, there was, it was a little bit different of a mindset, right? So my parents didn't really understand. The things that were being said versus the things that I seen didn't match anything. And so it led to a lot of confusion. I ultimately decided, like many other veterans, we just can't be a burden on other people, right? We are a very, strong group. We're supposed to, we have expectations of ourselves that we had developed in that transition into the military. And so we expect those to continue, right? And so you go through these changes and you don't understand what's going on. And so I didn't want to let my parents, see me like that, right? I didn't want to let my mama see me in all kinds of, different places mentally, right? And so I really had to get sort of my boots on the ground again, right? And so I actually left my parents' house sort of voluntarily. I went down to a local rescue mission because, I just, like I said, it's on me. And that's just sort of the mentality that we carry. And I'm sure many other veterans would agree. So I go through, I spent a few months down there, and I still haven't been in the VA yet, right? I didn't even really know that our Syracuse VA was right just down the road from the Syracuse Rescue Mission. So, it was there where somebody had, made a note to me like, hey, you should check that place out, and I was always worried about going there because, exactly what Jen was saying, and, her and I have had this discussion a number of times. It's, we don't like to ask for help. It's not that, we feel like we're capable, right, to get those missions done because we've seen it in ourselves, right? And so when we can't tackle that problem, right, it resonates. And so rather than sort of face it, you do other things to sort of try to cope with it, right? So going through the VA, I was able to transition essentially, out from the rescue mission over a course of time where, I really had nothing. I sort of looked at that opportunity and said, I'm so young, I could either make the difficult decision, get up and get out there and, go up from there, or I could stay here. And I said, obviously I didn't really want to stay there. So I took that opportunity and said, okay, now I can transition into, I have an opportunity to completely reinvent myself. And so I had to ask, well, what does that look like, So I had ideas rolling around my head. And so I got my start when I was 25 at a community college up here at Onondaga. And so that really helped me transition from, the former soldier and re-entering back into the civilian world. And so OCC gave me the opportunity to get back into the college mindset. And, it wasn't the easiest transition. A lot of what Jen was saying, being a non-traditional student, seeing some of the things that you see in those experiences, they bring a different effect to the table that maybe some of the other students who are traditional don't really have. And so the patience essentially on the veteran, sort of gets treaded on because it's, it's difficult to sort of make the connection, right? And you want to be a part of something again. And so you try to be a part of this thing, but you don't really quite fit. So, going from OCC to Lemoyne, I had an opportunity to then say, okay, during this transition, I want to fit into something, right? And so I got with Jen here, and Jen helped me and my other, student veteran counterparts at the time, really get the student veterans, the SVO, the SVA that we had at Lemoyne off the ground. We were a recognized chapter, and Student Veterans of America. And so, that really helped me in the sense that when I got to Lemoyne, I had a mission, I had resources, I had support, I had something that was bigger than myself. And, during that first year there, I think, I came to Jen and just said, I want to leave my fingerprint here. This is an opportunity for me to reinvent myself. This is an opportunity for me to be somebody that I needed to be. And so for other people who maybe don't know how to ask, right? Like other veterans who didn't go through my experience, who are just out there, and so, I think one of the highlights of, for me, for the SBA was, Jen and I had gathered up, the group of our veterans, and we went down to that very same rescue mission, and we volunteered. And I remember very specifically being on the other side of that counter. And, that whole time I looked for me in there, right? Because I wanted to be, somebody that I needed for somebody else. And, that helped me transition, a purpose, right? Something to continue and something to hold on to, and to, really keep that as like a mission for me, because it really sort of reconfirmed things that, about the moral injury, where some things happen in service where, you feel like you violated that, and you really do ask those questions. Am I a good person, right? Everybody experiences different. And so, going through that sort of phase, all of these things really, really helped the transition. And I was very fortunate to, be able to come into situations that I had, but, in the beginning, you had to have the right eye to see those opportunities. And, being a student veteran, being a veteran, I think at all, you already have that tool bag to get the job done. So, going from Lemoyne, then out into the professional world, that was a little bit more of a rocky experience. I didn't come right out of like a practice, a job, so when I got to Lemoyne, I had been hired on by EY. I got an internship there. And so as I graduated, I thought I was walking into a job, and that ended up falling through. And so that was at, an accounting firm. I don't know that everyone there could really sort of, understand, the differences with, veterans and, maybe regular civilians who haven't gone through the service, where those bridges gaps. So there was some tension. And I think, initially that was, difficult to deal with, because I spent all this time, really investing myself and reinventing myself. And almost like what Jen said, to sort of put that veteran stuff in a box, right? And when really, that's really my strength, all of that stuff. So trying to keep that all mentally organized inside is, it's difficult. You go through all this time that, you spend on yourself to get yourself ready for the situation. And then you sort of see like, oh, maybe I had this all wrong, right? And so, you really have to stick to your guns and, push through the kill zone. And that's just something that, you learn in the military, to just keep going, and, as you do, things, you tend to catch breaks. So, I was able to, catch some other breaks. So I thought, hey, all right, so the public accounting thing didn't work out. So then I went private. And so I knew a guy, at another firm that, it gave me an opportunity. But again, I ran into the same sort of choke points with a lot of specifically upper management, which was a complete surprise to me when I got to the civilian world. And I think a lot of people want to know. They want to ask questions. They don't know exactly how to approach it, right? But I think they genuinely have an interest in shared human experiences, right? So I think sometimes they just need a little bit more self-awareness of how, what that would mean for like the veteran, right? And so I had the CFO outside of a bar after a company event. We were outside smoking a cigarette, and he'd come out and he had asked me too. He said, ever killed anyone? And my manager was standing there. And so, I had dealt with that question a little bit before. And I know that earlier on, that question was really difficult for me to tackle, right? It was offensive. It's like, why do you want to know that? What judgments are you making about me that, you really want to know? And what changes there, right? And so that's a really difficult question, because, when we got, I think, the CFO went on vacation that very next week. Well, when he got back after that conversation that we had, even though I deflected the question and just said, that's not really a question you should ask. I don't think he, understood, what was so wrong about that. He ended up actually firing me that week that he got back. So the transition from college, there was a couple bumps in the road, so I decided then that, like I had to sort of maybe approach this a little bit differently, and I don't want to say that I kept, the veteran stuff in the box, because, really it was more about the spot that I went to next, right? It was more about the people who understood, right? And so they were, the transition into out of accounting into data analytics and things like that for the manufacturer that I work for now. Some of those things just sort of went away with the type of people that were around who were sort of aware because they had family or because they have sons that are veterans. So that sort of awareness, that really brushed a lot of that stuff away. And so transitioning into this spot, really has been, a lot smoother transition. And, they actually keep, up to date with me on things like this that we're doing now. So they support, we have a veterans thing at work now that, we do. And so they like to, celebrate what makes a person unique, so the culture and the spot that I work at now, makes all the difference. And so, for people who are, dealing with that transition, you really got to push through the kill zone. And there's other people out there that, aren't going to, ask those questions. They're not going to, be so invasive into that space of your mind that you maybe just want to keep in by yourself. So, I think, now it's, it's been a ride.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to all the panelists. We're going to open up space for questions. We have a number of comments and questions that have been emerging in the chat. I wanted to bring forward a comment from Kathy Feeney that has a question connected to it. And Kathy notes that she works at a veteran nonprofit, and they're completing a renovation of an urban home in Pittsburgh. And the idea is to have a 3-bedroom home that would be a place to support women veterans as they return to school. And the school could be anything from 2-year, 4-year trade school. And they're looking for the thoughts of the panelists about, Kathy's looking for the thoughts of the panelists about what would work well there in terms of the home. And Kathy, if you want to, you can type other parts to that question, but I thought I would bring that forward since I think it came up very early on in the panel. And maybe Jen Jeffrey would like to tackle that first.
I was wondering if they had any, if they have any kids, or these are people who are unattached.
There's no information about that. So
just for people to be able to have private space for themselves, so that they're not always feeling like they're on top of each other, and that they can do their own rituals and things that they need to do, which would be the same for male veterans too. And just make sure you ask them questions about what they might need, and maybe career support like after they get out of school.
yeah, and one thing I'll just add, one thing I was thinking about in watching people share spaces like this is, what is a shared kind of space in the home versus obviously people's rooms and so forth, but understanding like how the people moving into the space are going to want to navigate it and use it. And I think that you're alluding to that as well. I wonder if Michael, even though this is focused on women veterans in particular, if you had any thoughts, because, just hearing your story too about moving out of your parents' home, going to the rescue mission, like if this kind of opportunity had come up for you, what of a shared place to live, what would you have looked for in that?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, women veterans, there weren't many women involved with the infantry where I was. So it's really difficult for me to speak on the behalf of women, but I will say with some student veterans, just on the male population, I know that, Jennifer and I were able to secure that Veterans House from Lemoyne, which is a great resource. And so we often shared that space. And I think that was very, very well received. I think we enjoyed having that space as a group of veterans to be a group of veterans together, a sort of, outside of maybe the classroom where you can't really do that. So I think as far as resources go, I think that's a great resource for veterans. And, as far as I could tell, I mean, specifically women veterans may enjoy that space all the same, with their related issues as well. So I would completely support that because like I said, at Lemoyne, having that as a resource was great. I would have welcomed that, absolutely.
Okay.
Michael, there's someone who would like you to expand a little bit, maybe 2 to 3 minutes on your interactions and struggles with authority figures during the transition. I mean, you talked about some of that. Can you say a little bit more?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what do you mean by specifically by authority figures?
Kind of different interaction styles or struggles in kind of working with authority figures during the transition.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. Let me think about that for a moment. I think what was initially so difficult is that what makes you good in the military is that you're given a space to complete a mission and a guideline sort of to be in the right place in the right time and to know what to do all the time, right? So in those spaces, you know how to be successful. And so when you get out of spaces, so sometimes even today, in the military, part of what made me successful is you're constantly confirming details, right, about the mission, right? And so those details constantly could change, right? And so going on into the professional world, something to me might seem as a detail that could change and change and change. Well, when you reconfirm that constantly with perhaps an authority figure like a boss or a manager, I think they look at that as something different than what it is, right? And so for me, it's a reconfirmation that, in fact, I am taking this file and putting it in here. And it could be that simple, right? But to them, I think that comes across the wrong way, right? Because in the military, you could be told in the same breath to put this file here and there. And, to break it down simply, you want to confirm that as the mission continues. And so that constant sort of, confirmation may come across the wrong way. And I think it has a few times, just because that's how you stay essentially mission ready and on top of the mission, right? The attention to detail, right? So I hope that answers your question.
I would say something else about authority is I had, I commanded search and rescue missions and things like that. So, and law enforcement missions in the Coast Guard, and I got out and I was an administrative assistant and I had a lot of command and control, and they didn't want to hear it because I wasn't the boss. Like I would be like, hey, this is what we need to do. And they'd be like, hey, you need to tone it down. And I still haven't really got rid of that, because a lot of times I just get frustrated and I take command, and I take risks now that I used to be more afraid of losing my job. But
Don't ever get rid of that, Jen.
but they weren't, they were trying to put me in my place, and I was like, well, I that wasn't my place before, and I just don't really accept that. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. It's like in the military, you're given a set, there's rank, right? There's a ranking system, and you don't question the things that come down the hill, right? And so when it's a difficult thing to sort of, remember that, you're trying to stay in your own lane when now in the civilian world, everybody's just playing bumper cars on the highway. And so it's not like that in the military, right?
Yep.
And so everyone's knocking into you and you're just trying to drive on with the mission, and you gotta, sort of,
Yeah.
you think to put people in their lane, but really that's not, if you're out of the military now, that doesn't work. That's not the right style. So you have to navigate. That's certainly a tough transition, as Jennifer was saying.
Jen Reddy, I wanted you to know that Deborah Cromley was here and checked in. She had to go back to class. And also Lowell chimed in to talk about how important your work with him was at Lemoyne, and the importance of a solid landing place, someone who will really help you facilitate all of the, jump through the hoops and work through a really new system. So
thanks. Thanks for being here, and thanks for the compliment.
Rich Purcell, if you're interested in this, Rich Purcell is with the Syracuse Vet Center, and they offer free and confidential readjustment counseling. They've got 2 podcasts scheduled, and he's got his name and contact number in the chat. So if that's something you want to pursue. And there's another resource as well, a veteran-run podcast called Regular Infantry Guys. So if you want more of this kind of connection and data, make sure you look that up in the chat. It's obviously here on the webinar, and when we post it later on, you'll be able to access that information again.
I also wanted to chime in as a faculty member of almost 30 years. So I know that a lot of faculty have student veterans in their classrooms and they're aware of it, and sometimes they're not. There's a stealth veteran in the classroom who hasn't identified that they have served in the military. But one of the things that I know faculty struggle with, because I've seen this when I was department chair, and I've also talked to other faculty who will contact me because of my work with the Veterans Writing Group and ask for advice. And I'd like to hear from those of you who've been student veterans, and also Jen Reddy, from your vantage point, what would you like faculty members to understand, like some basic ground rules about how to value your participation in the class, but also how not to put you in a hyper visible position where they're, you know, you were deployed to this region of the world. Tell us what you think. Now, maybe some people would like that, but a lot of people would not. So what are ways that you would like to advise faculty members and those of us trying to establish faculty development programs or try to help our colleagues figure out how to relate productively to student veterans? And I hate to be asking the question, but I think it's a really relevant question.
I think it's important to remember that military status is a protected status. So I've actually had to advise, like, sort of like, no, pump the brakes there, like well-meaning faculty saying, I know I've got these people who are veterans in my class, but maybe not everybody knows. So I'm gonna, like, you know, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna call on them for their experience. And you know, you need to have those conversations in private first and see if that's okay. And again, the other thing is, it's just not assuming anything. Some want to blend into the background, and especially with female veterans, I feel like it's easier for them to blend in with the regular student population. And some of them want that, but then some of them don't. And some of them get pissed off when they're asked, like, what do you mean you don't remember this? We just had this in high school last year. Like, I've been in freaking high school for 10 years, but it's a compliment. See, you look young. So that can be a struggle both ways, really. But yeah, again, if I could just stress, like, that's protected status, so be careful what you do with it.
And I would say, to make sure you do it like any other discussion, it's the same. Veterans are the same as, say, you have an African American student. You don't call them out. You facilitate discussions. Well, if you're not good at facilitating discussions, don't do them. Do something else, because it's really uncomfortable for somebody who gets called out, or another group takes over the discussion and then you don't get a back and forth. You get them putting their opinions on top of the other person. I've seen that not just with student veterans. I've seen it with Jewish kids and different things like that. So, and I call them kids because I'm old.
Michael, do you want to comment, Michael? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think, you know, like Jen alluded to there, you know, I think, you know, personally, you know, I think an advanced sort of notice, hey, you know, I know that you're a veteran here, you know, I want to sort of respect your time in service. I want to respect your, you know, inner feelings there, and not call you out, or, you know, not try to spotlight you, or not let a, you know, traditional student who never deployed to the Middle East try to, you know, correct over the top of me when I was, you know, when I was actually there, right? And, you know, that's happened where, you know, an opinion was completely, you know, false based on my experience. Versus, you know, that's sort of, you know, the issue that we have here is, right? It's like, you know, we're told one thing here, and then, you know, what I actually seen was completely different, right? And so not a lot of people can understand that that's even possible, right? So sometimes it's like, well, you know, you're asking me for advice, and then you're telling me that what I experienced was wrong for another student's opinion who wasn't there, right? And so that's really offensive, right? It's almost like, you know, why did you even ask me? You know, so, I think taking the opportunity to just sort of pull that veteran aside, right? And then inside the classroom, valuing their experiences as sort of a firsthand source, right? Don't ask me for, my source information and then sort of just tell me that that didn't happen, right? It seems obvious, but maybe not so much. But I think I would, in times like that, hey, I would have appreciated, pull me aside and say, hey, I think you can have something to contribute to this, right? And do you mind if we bring this up, right? Can we talk about this? How comfortable are you, right? Just really level off with them. They're adults who have gone through crazy experiences, right? And they're all different. And so I can't speak on the greater behalf on everybody. I know for myself, I would have appreciated and respected that and been more likely to openly share things that maybe I didn't, so I could feel a part of the discussion, right?
Thank you. I know we might have other questions in the chat or other comments that Susan might want to bring forward for us. Susan, do you have any that you want to bring forward?
I've got, I put out there, if you work at a college, what do you see on your campus? And at SUNY Empire State College, Mindy was saying that they've got physical locations all across the state, but no one big campus. And so it's very distance learning based, and they've really struggled to get a strong enough cohort of student veterans so that you can create that kind of a group. And I think in setting this up, I talked to other campuses where they're just about to start organizing or try to reorganize a student veteran group. And so what thoughts might you have, you three panelists, about how to support people who don't quite have the SBA that at Syracuse University has, or Lemoyne College might have at this point?
Well, on the one hand, it's hard because of your sort of like the disparateness of everything. On the other hand, we're all kind of getting used to this Zoom thing now. So that might be a real advantage. And your students are probably going to be even more used to that, although maybe not. Maybe, I don't know if you do more asynchronous stuff or whatever, but I think it's a really good time. And it's funny because I have students who are really struggling to just get through classes, and we did have a really kind of a small meeting, but we had a small meeting of the Student Veterans Association, which, sorry, Lowell, I have to follow up on. But it was actually kind of nice because we're all used to Zoom. We all have Zoom, and we didn't have to worry about travel time. We didn't have to figure out, well, when is everybody on campus? It's just like, when is everybody not working or in class? So it's like, at least, sort of one thing that is facilitating a different kind of connection. So I don't know, maybe take advantage of that moment in time now.
Mm-hmm.
And hi, Mindy.
Jennifer and Michael, do you have any thoughts about that? Jeffrey.
Oh, yeah, no. Well, I've been thinking about that because of the, I myself get like tired of being on the Zoom. I move around, I walk a lot, and so it's hard for me to sit and do that. So I don't know if it's hard to connect in a pandemic, and I've been thinking about how to do that with people. Maybe just a phone call and somebody's walking around, and maybe you get small group things or something like that, and they're all on a phone call and they get to walk or run. I don't know, because by the end of the week, like sitting on another Zoom call for me is hard. I don't know about Michael, like how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, much like, I think everybody can agree in the military, you learn how to do like three main things. And it's one of the times is when a body is in motion, it stays in motion. And the other was when it stops, the lights kind of go out. You need to catch up, right? So it's difficult, and to really to keep that sort of thing going when you're sitting, right? So I'm not really sure how to navigate during this time. Some of those things. I mean, like Jennifer said, professionally, I mean, I feel like I'm constantly jumping in and out of meetings, whereas these might have been, maybe even regular emails or any other thing, and in passing at work, right? So a lot of my time with, even with the, roles expanding over time, it's getting taken up by things that, I don't know that they would take as long, or some things are even taking shorter. So it's really difficult to navigate, and really have a solid answer about that. But I mean, given things are so spread apart, I think what happens is for people who are getting out of the military and they sort of put that stuff in that box where, whatever, they tend to almost leave it there. Even with some of the student veterans that were involved on our campus, they were just the military's in a box for them, and they put it, they tucked it away and slid it in a shoebox under the bed, so they sort of want to keep their distance. So it's really tough to gauge, involvement, student involvement. And, even when we went to the, annual Student Veterans of America down in Disney that one year, Jen, that was a lot of the discussion that we talked about, is how do we get more women involved, and how do we really cater to sort of, bringing back that sort of camaraderie, that brotherhood that, we all looked for, and, some of us just never found.
Yeah.
Mindy adds that to the question of how to welcome student veterans into the classroom, she talks about kind of making an announcement the first day of class and several times throughout the semester that there may be student veterans in the class, and to create a framework for their participation that includes respect for their perspectives, so that you're really setting that out there as part of the expectations of the class and a set of ground rules.
Yeah, and I will add that there are some in universities and colleges that have developed syllabus statements about that. So that's something that we may want to share as a resource after this session. I wanted to say, in response to the comment about being an online university and wanting to create community among student veterans, I appreciate what the panelists said. I think that's really important. I want to also mention there's a lot of different ways to create community with the student veterans on campus, but also alumni who are veterans. And the Veterans Writing Group that we developed at Syracuse University for the last decade is a space where student veterans can meet alumni of the university and come together around their identity as veterans and share their writing and their stories. Now, we were meeting face to face for years, and now because we're in the pandemic, and we have a lot of folks who are medically vulnerable because of their service experiences and just because of the pandemic, we meet online. So that's been an interesting challenge to navigate as people have different comfort with technology. But one of the reasons that we were able to come together and stay together across the generations and branches of the service, different wars, conflicts, different experiences, is that stories, because that's really why we get together, is so that people can find space to share stories. And I know that not every college or university has a veterans writing group, or there may not be a desire to have that, but there are a lot of activities that people can come together around, whether it's writing or it's art or it's discussion groups on global affairs. I do know that obviously Team Red, White, and Blue, it gets together for running and like being outdoors, service activities. But I think there are ways to tap into maybe networks that are in the community to bring veterans across generations together. Because one of the things I'm always concerned about in the position that I have is, being a student is a short-term affair unless you go on for a master's or PhD or what have you. But the connections that we have through alumni networks are lasting. And I always feel like we need to bring together student veterans with alumni. And I know that at Syracuse that happens in a variety of ways. But I'm always interested in like, how can we do it around some activity, like say writing and sharing of stories? Because all three of you really talked about sharing stories. And that seems really vital to me as part of transition, is what is your story? What is the story that you're willing to share? What is the story that people expect you to tell versus the story you really want to tell? And I heard a lot of that in both Michael and Jen J's comments. Like, people want to believe things about you or think things about you or kind of interpolate you or bring you into a story they have about you or ask you a question that's intrusive, invasive, and just plain terrible. But like, how could you have spaces to tell your stories? And so, Michael, it was exciting to hear that your workplace has a ritual or events that connect to veterans and create space. But I think we all have to ask ourselves, whatever institution we're in, where's there the room for the individual story and that moves beyond assumptions?
Eileen, Mindy says, thank you for that idea.
I hope that helps, Mindy. And I think it is a challenge. The online stuff is a challenge.
But you know, the connection with veterans also does another thing, because the two transitions, Michael, that you talked about, the transition in the workplace sounds like it was a bit rougher. And so
Yeah.
to have a network of people who could provide the same support around a workplace environment that Jen Reddy supported around a higher ed environment would be really nice.
I mean, going back to the connections, I mean, you know, Jen and I continue to talk to this day. You know, so during that period, you know, I have no problem reaching out to Jen. You know, Jen was a great resource for me during the transition to college. And, you know, we kept in touch. You know, I think Jen and I are very close. And, you know, she was able to sort of, you know, offer professional advice in that time, right? And so those connections go beyond just student veteran to student or to faculty, right? Because I have other students that were my friends that, you know, I continue to speak with that, you know, really the alumni, it's brilliant to invite people that have done it and to talk about their experience and how they navigated. Because, you know, as the veteran, I think, you know, you question, okay, well, you know, I can see, you know, how this works, right? But, you know, do I know anybody that's gone through what I've gone through and made it, right? Because it's different. And so, you know, I just think that would be really super helpful. You know, so I know when we you know, we still do some of the SVA stuff at Lemoyne. So I love going back to those things just because I was there when, you know, Jen helped us get it off the ground. And so, you know, seeing that still in place, you know, that allows me to feel like, you know, I have an opportunity to be there, be the person that I needed somebody to be for me, you know, and, you know, that, you know, helps me tremendously as much as it helps the rest of the veteran community.
It occurs to me through this conversation too, that I was just thinking, yeah, you've come back and sort of facilitated in a new year, like a Student Veterans Association meeting or whatever. So you could just give a little idea of the history and then, yeah, you stay connected, and that's great. But yeah, really, we should be doing this kind of stuff in career services or in augmentation of career services. So you know, I needed some more stuff to do.
And I would say higher ed is probably further ahead than the places of employment, because
Yeah, 100%.
I've had people look at my resume, and I changed jobs, but that was because I got promoted. But they were like, well, you changed jobs 3 times. Like, well, yeah, because I was moving up, you know, but they interpreted it in a traditional sense that, you know, there were people in their company that worked there for 30 years. And it's like, well, that's not my life, you know. But they thought of me as less, not a suitable employment person. And they also didn't listen to me about that I had worked with men. I wanted to work in a factory. And I said, I can work with men. I've worked with men my whole career. And they didn't believe me. And so I didn't get the job, you know, and it would have been really good money, much more than an administrative assistant, I can tell you that much. So I was, you know, trying to get this better job for me and my son, and just completely the lens that they were looking at me through was just horrible. So, and that's out there still. So, and for other people too, for other non-traditional people. But.
Yeah, I think, you know, going through that, you know, what she said, I think, you know, at the college level, it's light years ahead, because, you know, think about this, you know, I'm going into an accounting interview, right? And I have, you know, people interviewing me, and, you know, what's on my resume? You know, I have period of award time on there, right? So when they ask me questions like that, you know, I don't, it's really tough to translate some of that stuff onto a professional resume and then answer questions professionally in a job that has nothing, you know, that nearly would translate except the intangibles, right? All of those intangibles translated, you know, but you know, I wasn't kicking many doors in the accounting office rooms, and, you know, so it's, it's really tough to explain in that interview process. And then they're sort of evaluating, well, how does that fit, and they don't realize the sort of underlying intangibles. So it's, I've definitely been in awkward situations in an interview where I knew I wasn't getting the job based on, my description of what I did in the military. So it was very hard to sort of learn what to say and not to say. So, I think at college, Jen was very open and had an open door policy that I plenty of times I went in there and I used Jen as a resource to discuss things when close the door, so that's not really the same sort of vibe, right? Like you can't say certain things, or you don't want to, mislead somebody because they just simply don't understand, right? They didn't experience it. So
this gets to another question, and I want to throw this in here before we go back to the chat. So given that divide, what are the ways forward as in terms of creating opportunities to shape workplace understandings of military service and to get past some of these stigma moments? I don't know if that's like training the new generation of managers, or it's specific companies adopting policies and having training across the management cycle and also down into the workplace. I just wonder what all of you think about that, having heard stories or gone through things. And we've heard a lot about some of those challenges. And I know they're real because I've heard them from the veterans that I work with as well. But so problem solving, thoughts?
I mean, I think there's work being done on that. There's research being done on that and case studies and cases being made. And I think some companies do get it. But I think you have to be very careful when, just as yourself, unfortunately, it is on the individual when you're going to interview. Like one of the things I used to tell people when I advise veterans, I would say, one of the things that makes me less nervous in an interview is, besides, forget about like that you have to put your roof over your head and your food on your table, you're interviewing them too. And you want to find out how they treat you. And if you get a red flag first thing in the interview, it's, even though it's a good opportunity, you might want to pass. Mm-hmm. And not like, we can train veterans how to talk and how to think about their careers, but we also have to, we have to get enough veterans in. It's the same with getting enough women in the workplace or enough women in Congress. It changes when you have those people out there telling their stories. And, it's hard to tell your story sometimes. And sometimes it's not an appropriate place to tell it. But I think things like this, and also, if you do encounter somebody and you think you got nothing to lose, maybe educate them there.
Yeah.
It's a hard question to answer, but it's something to keep putting in people's faces. And there's also companies that, because it's hot, to hire veterans, but when you get there, the culture really doesn't support you. So, thinking about when you go out there, you think about what you really need for support, and that's going to be different for different people, but the interview is just as much for you to interview them as it is for them to interview you.
Yeah, I wanted to say there was a YouTube video that was circulating a number of years ago called, stupid shit that civilians say to veterans, and that was making it round. And I actually, like, people would other faculty would contact me because I work with a veterans writing group in the moral entry track, and they'd say, well, I have a student. I would send them that video. There would often be a response like, oh, like I saw myself in that video, or wow, I better think about what I'm doing. And I like to bring that. I actually built a writing assignment for the veterans writing group about that, because what do you want to be asked by your colleagues at your workplace or people that you're interacting with? What would you like to be asked? What would you like to talk about, versus all the terrible things that people do ask or do assume but there's also like, it could be an opportunity. And I always like, you know, in terms of my civilian counterparts, of which I'm a civilian, I have to like call myself on the carpet when I make mistakes, and I do, is like, how can I think about how to have a conversation that's going to be productive for both sides and where I can learn more, and also that person on the other end can feel heard and their story can be valued. So I just want to say, I wanted to throw that out there. I don't know if that's still on YouTube, but it was for a number of years, and I would circulate it, and I thought it was a really great resource. Susan, do we have anything further in the chat we need to bring?
Lowell chimed in to really echo what Michael was and Jen were both saying, is that people's preconceptions regarding veterans' experiences have really been a barrier, and his reaction has been to kind of minimize that part of himself if he wants to get a job. And then Jen, Christine is ready to help you with the alumni networking project.
Yeah, I mean, and I just will go back to what Lowell is saying. There's a category of veteran that in like journals of veteran studies and like veterans writing about their experience, called stealth veteran. Like, don't let them know, you know, that you're there, that you're there. And Jen's raising her hand right there. But I thought that you know, that expression was really useful for understanding, you know, the need to find a way to survive in a system that might be hostile or make assumptions, like how to just succeed in spite of that.
Yeah, I mean, and then the trick for me is when you're coming in to a new setting, and the transition is enough all by itself, but then you're just not sure what's safe and what's not safe. How do the folks in that setting, how can the institution and its structures create an invitation that, even if you're kind of feeling underground, allows you to connect so that you can get the benefit of connecting with folks who might be having a similar experience.
Yeah, I mean, is there a question in that, Susan, or did you want the panel to respond?
I just think it's at the crux of this.
Yes.
But I think too, I'm in the place where I'm starting to think about, like, being a stealth veteran isn't necessarily the way to go either. So, you know, it is something you navigate, but how do I tell my story better to let them understand without, you know, totally being in their face? And people at my work really care about my service, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And they're supportive of me, but just thinking about, like, being able to tell your story, and also thinking about placing yourself in places where that is supportive. And if people want to be more supportive, then I think it goes across the board, not just with veterans. If a place is a good place to work, it's probably going to, for everyone, it's probably going to be for veterans. But that's just, you know, my observation. I've worked in a lot of places, so like, and also where people don't, you know, try to use that as a branding thing and a hero worship thing, where they're just like, well, we want to, you know, help person get a good employment or something like that. That's our goal. Our goal isn't just to put our, like, brand up there as a veteran friendly place, you know, and to have Veterans Day off, you know, so you can go to events if you want to or something, you know, like really have Veterans Day. I don't have Veterans Day off because I'm in the wrong union, you know. So
Well, it's so funny you say that. You spend all your time before you're a veteran getting Veteran Day off, and then when you're a veteran, you don't get Veterans Day off. So
yeah. So,
I don't.
just something simple like that. Just
Yeah.
You know.
I don't think. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not the breakfast really, or it's not the lunch that, you know. It's like, oh, I spent all that time, you know, becoming a veteran, and then I had it off, you know, and now all of a sudden I don't have it off anymore.
Yeah, and then if you get it off, are there meaningful events and interactions that you can have? And that, I hear that like when we've talked about Veterans Day, when we don't do a writing group reading for the Veterans Writing Group, people have said, I was really lonely on Veterans
Yeah.
Day. You
Yeah.
know, I don't want to go to a parade. Like some people enjoy parades and ceremonies, and others are like, that's not where I want to spend my time.
Right.
I wanted to interact with other veterans and remember my comrades and have
Yes.
space to tell stories and interact. And that's not always there for everybody.
Right. No, I think Jen, that first year that we got that off the ground, I think that was our biggest thing, is that on Veterans Day, we wanted to have a celebration of everybody's time in service. And I mean, I think that first year we had the Veterans House was packed, and, everybody that had a piece to contribute about their time in service came, and, that was one of the highlights of, having the SVA and starting that was like, that was a really beautiful thing. And I think that just having us there and, that was great for me. I mean, certainly I hold on to that still, so, that was big. And I mean, it's a great idea to, really try to have those resources, right. And to foster a sort of that, commitment to, celebrating, as a veteran, your time in service for yourself, right. Because a lot of people do put that in the box. And so, I don't like that I did that, because really those are some of my greatest strengths, and it wasn't really, maybe it was the way I was explaining it, or maybe it was the interpretation, who's to say, right? But, you just got to keep going, and, you really, those are your strengths, and those got you through so much. And, it just translates a little different, so you have to sort of learn how to use a hammer again, right? So a hammer is not the same hammer in the military as it is on the professional world. In the professional world, you actually have a hammer. In the military, you probably have a can of soup. So, it's.
It's really old.
There's so many memorable lines that were said in this panel. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, as someone who studies language, I'm like, oh, there were so many great statements and lines. So I'm glad we have this on video. I want to see if there are any other comments from the chat or questions. Susan, is there anything further that?
I don't see any, no.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the panelists, and thank you for sharing your stories about your work, either going through transitions in higher education in the workplace or supporting student veterans and veterans going into the workplace. I want to mention too that this webinar series, this was the very first one that we did in this series on Finding True North, focusing on student veteran transition and veteran transition to the workplace. On November 11th, which Veterans Day, we will be focused on veterans sharing their stories. So maybe it'll be somewhat of the spirit of what Michael was describing, of veterans coming together to share some of their stories from service. The Veterans Writing Group will be reading from some of their literary works. It will be 7 to 8:30 on Zoom. We will send out invitations to all of you who are here today, and also others to pass around to people that you want to invite. And we will also on November 20th have the opportunity to talk about the question of trauma resiliency, which is a term that's being used to describe how to think about processing the trauma that comes from war and military service. And we're honored to have Bill Cross, Dr. Bill Cross. He's a Vietnam veteran. He was an Army officer. He's also a practicing psychotherapist in Syracuse. And he's also a retired professor of Onondaga Community College, where Michael got his start. He's worked with military veterans and families for over 35 years. And he's going to not only share his insights about trauma resiliency and methods that he's developed to help calm the body through trauma and think through the question of trauma, but he's going to tell some of his story as a Vietnam veteran coming home, and also a West Point graduate, someone coming home from military service into a profession in a field where veterans weren't entirely accepted. And he'll work through some of the story of his transition coming back from Vietnam, and also taking stands in relationship to war that were very much against war. So he founded West Point Graduates Against the War. So he occupies a lot of interesting positions. So he will be speaking November 20th, 12 to 1:30 on Zoom. I think we're at the end of our program time. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our translator and our CART transcriptionist, as well as the panelists and Susan French for bringing the questions forward. Thank you to the audience for sticking with us. There's still 22 people still here and that's great because I know people have to go in and out. But thank you very much. And we'll end the session. We'll save the chat. And we'll also make sure that we publicize when this is available on YouTube for you to view or to share with others. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
You.